your day.
The current situation in our country, that leaders ought to consult their constituents so that then the direction will be given. And it's not a one-man show. It's actually a people's, kind of an engagement. And actually seeking for direction doesn't mean that you're a fool. Yeah.
I love that, because you're seeking for direction doesn't mean that you're a fool.
Yes.
All right. So we're getting into a conversation, and obviously the youth perspective takes center stage around some of the things that we discussed this morning. We are also asking questions then around, okay, so who then ensures or makes sure that it's an all-inclusive, all-encompassing conversation? It had been from the time of the protests in 2024, which is kind of like, ground zero when we talk about certain things when it comes to leadership, that people said, you need to give younger people an opportunity, and that you cannot have an older person in a position of representation in government. It doesn't make sense. Is it enough to say, Wakili, that just give young people positions? Is that enough?
I think, to begin with, this is not a generational war. This is not a war between the old generation and the young generation. Necessarily, the young generation equally have a task to build capacity, because I believe that for leadership, it requires capacity, and leadership beyond even the political space, even into corporate space, requires a lot of building of capacity. So backdating into the 2024 protest and backdating into whatever spiraled up that particular protest and the agitation that was there then, we look into an aspect of the neglect of the youth. The youth equally are learned people. The youth equally have gone to universities, they've gone to colleges, they've advanced their careers, they've actually built capacity in their different ways. More is to be done, but I think at the point we were in 2024, we were good. So the political class not giving the youth a chance to air out their views, and them being the know-it-all, them owning up the whole process, was the absolute cause of the problem that was there then, and was the absolute cause of the protest. Because, for example, when you talk about the Finance Bill 2024 that actually spiraled up the protest then, it seemed as if the older generation knew too much, had very good things then that they wanted to give to the nation. But then once we started correcting them, once we started saying, hey, look, there's a problem here, there's actually a challenge here that we can solve this way, then we are not listened to. So I think the youth equally played a great role in trying to also pass on civic education and also trying to showcase that indeed capacity has been built, but give us the chance.
Okay, so we talk about, he says it is not a generational war. It is not the legacy politicians versus the youth. It is a question of we want to be heard. But if you look at the youth saying we want an opportunity as well, one would equally tell you that power is never given, power is taken. And with that comes the organization among the young people to ensure that that which they push for, they have the seat at the table, that they are able to change these policies and what is happening from within, from inside. So you come from the Youth Nation Kenya. Are these conversations that are being had among the young people in terms of facing the bull by its horn and putting it down to finally sit there?
Well, we have to begin this conversation from representation of the young people. So what we are seeing as the Youth Nation is the neglect on the representation by the youth, both in legislation and also in the governance and administrative affairs of this country. So it starts there. So when we look at, when we go to that, we find that the youth rights aspect has not been vocalized. The implementation of it has been neglected also. So we believe that first we have to begin from the constitutional approach, that there is the right to representation. There's the right to participation. Because the conversation that is going on right now is more of a civic conversation vis-a-vis the fact that the young people feel they are left out in decision making, and the people who are in politics, who to them they seem to be like the old timers, are not getting the real concerns that the youth have. So we have to start this whole approach of the conversation in making adjustments on representation of the youth in legislation, because whether we stay in the street or whether we continue picketing, decisions are made in legislation, in parliament. So we have to rethink, how are we going now to outdo the system? We have the numbers, and the numbers count not only in the streets, they count in the ballots. So we have to rethink our approach in terms of dealing with the systematic error that is there, and also congregate together, get united, because what we have seen on the street is togetherness. There is no aspect of unity. Everyone is saying, let's do this, and that is where we are getting it wrong. So we have to start first in the approach of representation, and specifically on legislation. So it is not representation just as a youthful constituent, it is also representation as a youthful demographic in leadership. Because what we face in this country is a leadership gap. It is an administrative gap and governance. So the whole conversation should take us to how do we revisit on constitutional basis our leadership structure, our administrative structure, and the governance. I believe personally that we are ready. We are ready as young people for the amendment of the Constitution to address now the lag issues. Leadership. What kind of leadership do we want? What kind of administration do we want? What kind of governance structures? Because whether we like it or not, the leadership structure as it is, it has some gaps, and these gaps are based on administration and the governance.
When you mean constitutional amendments, what exactly are you saying?
Well, I'll start from the aspect of empowerment. As I sit here, there's a presentation that is currently going on the Youth Bill 2025, and the Youth Bill 2025 is on its way to Parliament, and some of the things that are highlighted on this bill, they demonstrate the gaps that have been there on the leadership and the administrative factors as in relation to the young people. So we have to think of a way that young people not only they just don't become a voting tool, they become also the leadership and decision making. That is one aspect that we feel left out. And I'll give a good example. The representation in Parliament right now, out of the two houses of the young people, it is less than 20%. Mm-hmm. So if your voice is less than 20%, I mean, even if you have a good idea, like now the issue of youth empowerment, economic empowerment, so the youth are in the streets because of laxity and the lapse on economic empowerment interventions. These are policy issues. These are legislative issues. We have to rethink about that. I've seen on this bill that one of the conversation about the youth right is being restated. The restatement of the youth right, which has been there in itself, is an indication that that right has not been given to the youth as it was expected. So we have to think about the real things that make the difference in decision making. And decision making does not end just on the street. It ends also in the legislation. What laws?
Okay, so that doesn't necessarily mean that there would be a call for constitutional amendment. It sounds to me that what then needs to happen is that those who've been tasked with responsibility of legislation and representation actually do their job.
Yes.
Does it mean that you need to go as far as constitutional amendment to get some of these policy issues actually taken care of? You talk about 20% is the representation of young people in parliament. Is that true, or is it that we only have 20% in terms of an age demographic represented in parliament? Because those are those are two totally different issues.
Exactly.
Because you could have somebody who is in the youth bracket in terms of the age demographic, but is not necessarily representing the issues that young youth are facing. Two totally different
Very
things.
true.
So when we talk about these gaps, what are the gaps that we're talking about? Unemployment is one of them that you
Exactly.
say. Does it need somebody who is young in age to then go into parliament to fix it? Akili.
I think picking from where my colleague has left the discussion, I'll say that Kenya has too many laws. Already, it's superfluous. Already, we need to implement the already existing laws. We don't need any constitutional amendment, just to differ with my colleague. We actually need implementation of the existing laws that are already there. You see, the Constitution is very robust and it's very progressive in nature. When you look at Article 53 of the Constitution, it highlights the youth as part of the marginalized groups that ought to be represented. Equally, Article 73 of the same Constitution speaks to the values and principles of good leadership. So what we need is actually implementation. And there have been talks all around the world of how progressive our Constitution is and how Chapter 6 speaks to what an ideal leadership ought to look like. When you speak about Parliament and its role, Article 94 and 95 clearly stipulates that Parliament also has a role of enacting legislation and laws, and it also has a role of oversight. Oversight also goes into the whole context and cracks of implementation. The implementation bit is that the youth issues that are already existing, even as we speak, before even we get to 2027, and before even we take out, we say that we want to vie for positions. Even before that, the representation that is already existing, the members of parliament that we chose, have a role by virtue of Article 94 and 95 of the Constitution to oversight the existing policies. There's a National Youth Act that is already existing. There's a National Youth Council that is created virtue of that particular act. So where is the National Youth Council as we speak?
Where is it? Maybe you can answer that for us. Where is it?
It's not existing. That's the simple response. The National Youth Council ought to then table policies. For example, the policy that is being fronted here by my colleague ought to go through the National Youth Council. Where is the National Youth Council? It is not existing as we speak. Probably it has been politicized. The whole structure has been politicized. Probably it has been infiltrated. Probably it has been absorbed by the existing system. But we need to look into the already existing structures that are there. Just to finalize on that particular point, I'll then also equally look into the principles of good governance by virtue of Article 10 of the Constitution. Article 10 requires transparency. Article 10 calls for a governance that is integral. Article 10 calls for accountability. Also, the Constitution then goes on ahead to then say that those who are found vulnerable, or those who are found culpable of failing to observe whatever tenets that are there, they must be brought to book. And the whole process of fair trial is there under Article 50 of the Constitution. So then we need to implement whatever is already existing.
So, which brings us to the next question with regard to what he said and what it is you're calling for constitutional amendments. One would say, when you look at the Constitution the way it is, the youth have been captured in it. The Youth Council has been captured in it. And you don't necessarily need a young person, even in Parliament, for these things to work. Let's look at the 2024 finance bill protest. It was clear on what citizens were saying. This thing will hurt us. Further extrapolate that to later when we're having a protest to do with police brutality, matters to do with economic empowerment. You know, these are things that even with the leadership that are in office today, if implemented, Kenyans, the youth, would not have a problem. Is our issue new laws, or is our issue the current leadership and implementation of the Constitution 2010?
There are two things to this whole segment, and I'm just getting back to facts. First of all, the implementation framework is there. the laws are there. Okay? But like any company, where you have policies guiding a company, I'm using it as just an example. When you find the managers, the supervisors, and the CEOs are not abiding to the policies and the principles of that company, then there is a problem. Now, what we are facing in this country as we speak is no lack of good laws. It is lack of goodwill on implementing these laws under the leadership, administrative, and governance charter. Why? The young people don't need to be generally, they don't to be in their big numbers in parliament. You might have that a young person like the ones, those who are in parliament, they're missing their priority in terms of bringing and highlighting the conversation for the young people. So we have to look at how do we get to a place of saying, yes, we have a good constitution, but we need to reinforce this constitution. And I'll give you a good example. Last year when the young people and all of us went to the streets, it was about the idea of a finance bill. Okay? So there was a rallying call that made everybody say, look, things are not okay. And I'm here to say that we are on the same spot because this year, we also, the young people were in the streets, not for the same reasons as last year, but looking at it, there is a voice in the noise that is saying something is not right. And this something that is not sitting right is what I'm saying. Well, the politician and the political class have not manifested or have not given us any indication of goodwill that the things that the young people are talking about are a priority. Case in point, my brother, we have the Youth Council, and the Youth Council as an enactment is very alive right now. It is only that it is under the State Department. The State Department in the office of the President. So it kind of ends up to become a mouthpiece on the presidency. So this is a question of who is in charge.
Are you saying the Youth Council is captured by the state?
I mean, by virtue of it being part, it is actually part of the state. It is not. It is not captured. It is an incentive. In fact, when you look at some of the amendments, some of the restatements in this bill, they are highlighting to how the youth council, the youth fund, and all the empowerment structure. So it's a question of who is calling the shots. So when we talk about let's make a way of probably relooking at some segments of the Constitution, it is not to say we are amending it, we are overhauling the Constitution. No, we are saying there are gaps we left. And why did we leave these gaps? Because the generations, the ones that we represent, was not featured in the preparation of the current Constitution. We just need to say something is not working right. Can we fine-tune it? Yes.
Okay, so let's take a break at this point. So then we're going to come back and say, okay, fine, that who then needs to take the mantle? And I think a bigger question that comes out of all of this, and some that we should probably actually interrogate, is that do you wait for it to happen, or do you say that, you know what, we keep fighting and fighting until it does? And those are some of the questions that we're asking this morning on the Youth Perspective. On the Situation Room this morning, we do have with us Wakili Mushanga Kiragu, a lawyer and youth leader of the Kikuyu constituency, and Nashaza Ndwati is a national chairman of Youth Nation Kenya. We'll come back and we'll continue with these conversations right after this. Don't go away. It's 29 minutes to 10.
This is the Situation Room. This is the Situation Room. The only way to start your day.
on Inside Sports every Monday to Friday at 1:30 p.m.
Breaking defenses.
Kenya thrives on agriculture and it's very fruitful. From the highlands that we grow our coffee and tea all the way to the resilient northeastern part with our livestock, and not forgetting the breadbasket in the Rift Valley.
If you're not able to meet an agronomist, you can even view channels whereby you can start from the bottom.
Maisha ya siku hizi ni kujituma. Hakuna haja kwenda kutafuta kazi, na kazi yenyewe iko hapa kwa mchanga.
At Farm Kenya, we celebrate those who make it happen. Farmers who innovate, adapt, and guess what? They're able to feed the nation. Together, we are growing nutrition.
Together, we are growing agriculture.
And together, we are growing Kenya.
I don't accept that.
Get ready for an unforgettable experience. At KTN, we've got it all. Hold tight, because the adrenaline rush is real. Our action-packed films will have you gripping your seat. Craving suspense? Hungry for adventure? Or just looking for that perfect escape? Whatever your mood, KTN is your ultimate destination for a movie experience.
Of somebody and not their gender. Can we apply the same to youth? And we say that, you know what, let's not sit here and say that because we want to have all-inclusive governance, and just because somebody is young, then they ought to be given a seat at the table.
True.
Are we moving away from that conversation? And are we getting to the place where we say, come on now, we're all living in this country together. The unemployment bites everybody. The poor access to resources bites everybody, whether you're young or whether you're old. So if we are looking at a change that needs to occur, do we say, well, you need to invite me to the table? Or do you say, excuse me, open the door, I'm at the table? What are we saying?
Fantastic. I think for the youth, and speaking to the whole issue of the intellectuals and the intellect part of it, I am a strong believer in building of capacity. I am a strong believer in saying that, yes, we need those positions. Yes, we need to sit at the table. Yes, we need to solve unemployment issues. Yes, we need to solve a lot of things that are going wrong in this country. But then, what capacity do we have? Have we then invested ourselves in learning the current situations in the country, in understanding the numbers, in understanding the finance bill, for example, in understanding whatever is already existing? Then from there, we can then pick up the discussion of proceeding to the table with content, with solutions. But also speaking into the issue of accountability on the already existing systems. You see, the Constitution envisions the Bill of Rights under Chapter 4. And the reason why I invoke the Bill of Rights is because human rights and good governance are mutually reinforcing. They go hand in hand. without good governance, we cannot have the observation of human rights. And without equally human rights, we cannot then bring to book the already existing governance. So, you see, for example, Article 25 of the Constitution clearly depicts that resources, for example, that are in the national government and even those in the county government ought to be showcased and ought to be given to the vulnerable people in the society. And you see, in this particular point in time, we then ask the question, are the youth part of the bracket? Do the youth also deserve to have these resources? Do the youth also deserve some allocations in the budget? And I think
I'm sorry.
Yes.
For what though?
You see,
for what that would be different from everybody else? Because when you say education, it's all encompassing.
Exactly. Yes.
When you say health, it's all encompassing.
Correct.
When you say infrastructure, it's all encompassing. So this budget that would be then given a percentage of to the youth, what for?
You see, I'll go back to the Constitution, and now from there, we'll pick up the discussion. The Constitution then envisions, you see, there are various groups that have been categorized under Article 53, and I began by saying that. And the youth is part of that particular group that has been envisioned under Article 53. And you see, the youth is not a special group per se, but it's also part of the groups that have been highlighted under Article 53. So let me pull the strings towards the discussion on the youth. You see, for the youth, what you're going to do with those funds is the question that you're actually asking. And the response to that question is, there are a lot of projects. For example, I had the president speaking about the climate smart works and also having projects that are youth-oriented. He talks constantly about the housing projects. I'm not quite sure how many people are actually employed in those particular projects. Probably the statistics would help us.
He said 300 and he said 3,500.
3,500, dependent on the areas, because I'm not sure, for example, in some areas we'll have all those 3,500. So when we speak, for example, about the climate smart works.
Actually, no, it was 350,000. Yes, 350,000
350,000
young people across the country who are hired in, you mentioned housing, in housing only.
Yes. So let me pick the discussion at the climate smart works, because that's, I think, what is a reincarnation of the Kazi Mtaani. You see, these are budgetary allocation that could actually help the youth, the unemployed youth out there, to, have something to do in the meantime before we get formal employment and before we actually go to greener pastures and actually have a living for our own selves. So the budgetary allocation ought to also look into the matters appertaining the youth, and specifically going through the projects that are already existing and some that are going to be created. I think we have gotten to a level where we ought to also give solutions and try to shape this country, because we have no other country. This is our country, and we have to shape it into whatever we desire. Again, when we look at the Constitution under the Bill of Rights, it equally speaks to the aspect of equality under Article 27. And you see, whatever you're doing for the women groups, whatever you're doing for the marginalized groups up there in northeastern and also some parts of even Mount Elgon, equally ought to be done for whatever for the youth groups that are already existing.
Like what? I'm going to stick on that.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think there needs to be clarity.
Yes.
When you're making a request for something,
yes,
there's got to be the objective of the request. There's also got to be the rationale for it. Because if we're saying give, for what?
True.
Because then that would then clear the path around, if that makes sense, where will the resources come from, who's going to carry it out, and unto what end, for what?
Thank you. I agree with what you're saying 100%. So this is the thing that we should be discussing. First of all, I have noticed that there is this mentality by the young people that employment is the only way. And that is why we are more of, we need jobs, we need employment. We should, it's one way, but it is not the whole way. So the first thing that we need to think very clearly is youth economic empowerment. Empowerment cuts across the board. Does it mean that do we create incentives that promote youth entrepreneurship, youth in innovation, youth businesses? When I look at what the government is doing through the Ajira and also the Bomayangu, it is one step to the right direction. But you see, you cannot absorb all these people. So we have to now rethink, how do we empower economically the young people? Do we need to come up with a way that allows the youth SMEs to thrive, to enjoy also the market, because the accessibility of resources and finances is one of the limitations that is making the young people say, we have the education, we have the talent, we have the innovation, but we can't access the resources. So we have to start from that. Now, when we come to that first step, then again, we must be accountable for our own actions. It beats the purpose to think that you can be economically empowered, but at the same time also you're saying that I really don't mind what happens to my country. It doesn't make sense. So we have to start the whole conversation by thinking, how do we advocate youth economic empowerment and transformation agenda as a nation?
You see, when you talk about youth empowerment and transformation agenda, let's just look at the role of the government, that is in terms of creating an enabling environment for businesses to grow, for SMEs to thrive.
Yes.
And this would come in different ways, even from a policy perspective, in the sense that if it is a young, a youth-led initiative, perhaps we'll get rebates, we'll have tax incentives if you're setting up a business, perhaps even tax holidays for starting businesses. But this is from a policy point perspective, and if you look at it from that end, we want to address unemployment in the country. Are we doing this in terms of tax holidays, making it easier, not going through all the laws and whatnot? But if you're not having such discussions from even the Youth Council, because I've just seen it is under the Ministry of Youth and whatnot, how then are we pushing these conversations to that level, so that it is from a policy perspective, this is what we want, this is how it should be addressed? But if we just sit here and say we want monies for what?
Exactly.
But if the government creates a good environment, then everybody is able to benefit from that. Is that the way we should go?
That's an interesting point of view. And actually, creating a good enabling environment is the surest way to actually ensuring that the youth are actually, feeling as if they are part of this particular nation. And I'll take you back also, even to the Finance Bill 2024 and 2025, that have been the point of contention, even as we talk about tax holidays, even as we talk about incentives, even as we talk about subsidies. So the youth participated rightfully so, in the particular fora that was organized by Parliament, virtue of Article 118 and 119 of the Constitution, public participation. So when the youth participated, they voiced out their concerns. They said, hey, look, there's a problem here. When we overtax these businesses, for example, when car importers, for example, are being overtaxed, so to speak, under the Finance Bill 2025, and you're looking at creating an enabling business environment, and you're looking at providing incentives for them to grow their businesses, then it beats the logic, it beats the whole intent and purpose of why then the policy should be existing as it is currently. So looking into the policy perspective, there needs to be a lot of teething here and there, so that then the policies can then favor the businesses that the entrepreneurship I hear us speak about, that the youth are always engaged in the different capacities. Again, when we speak about taxation, it then boils down to the constitutional provisions and Article 201 of equity, of equality, of transparency, of accountability. Once you are taxing, you must observe, it's called the 6 canons of good taxation. And also they were advanced by a writer called Adam Smith. So those principles of taxation then boil down to the whole issue of creating an enabling environment for the youth to do their businesses, for them to thrive
for anybody in the country.
For anybody in the
not
country.
Just
Correct.
For anybody in the country.
True.
So we're looking at two things here. We're looking at what governance and policy then goes on to provide, whereby anybody in the country will be affected, whether you're looking at, every whatever, segments of demography, youth, young people, children, women, whatever. We're also looking at governance roles that young people could actually play, youth can actually play. And there's the issue of experience that comes into play. People are saying, okay, well, that's great. You want to be a member of parliament? You want to be a member of the county assembly? It made headlines when we had a 24-year-old who was then elected in the last election. And everybody was like, wow, this is, it's great. It was great. But then was it her age? Or was it what she had already done and what she showed the promise of what she could do? It was not just standing on top of vehicles and campaigning, but she had a track record. In her short years, she had a track record. She had spun up enough experience for people to come and say, actually, you know what? It doesn't matter that she's 24. In fact, I think the people who elected her were surprised that why are you guys making noise about her 24 years of age? We've seen the work that she's done.
Yes.
So this connects us to an experience. Is experience then a requirement or prerequisite for consideration when it comes to leadership roles for younger people? And I say younger people deliberately.
Yes. I'm not saying yes to experience, but this is the thing. The first thing that comes into place is exposure. First of all, before you get experience, there's exposure levels. Then you build on the exposure, you capitalize now the experience. Because now, for instance, we are here. I might not be exposed in this industry enough to become probably a producer, you understand? But if I'm in this environment and I continue learning, then I gain the experience. When you deal with the young or probably professional, let me just call it the professional approach, exposure is the first step. Then how you capitalize and build on that exposure will determine the kind of experience you derive from that environment. Young people should not be disqualified for opportunities by the basis that they are not experienced enough. They should be given the opportunity first to be exposed and also to gain the experience as they learn. And that is why we have things like internship. Internship or the proteges is to give you that kind of experience, the experience that is required. But back to
Sorry,
yes.
That's interesting actually.
Yes.
So when we talk about leadership positions,
yes,
should there be an internship of sorts?
Yes.
That you get and you say, okay, well, let's have a go at it for 6 months or a year, and this is what it would look like if you had to be a member of parliament, for example, representation, oversight, legislation. Because you can have the exposure. I don't care, go wherever you want in the world, but you're not then going to be able to carry out conversations in the floor of parliament.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what you do.
Yeah,
no matter how you want to color it,
That's
you don't have the experience, you're not going to be able to sail the boat.
Yes.
So does it make sense? Because this is what we're talking about, that you start to change in democracies or in jurisdictions whereby this kind of thinking is front and center. You have people who are at the age of 14, 15 years old, having experience with what it's like to be in government.
True.
That's why you have programs like World Scholars, and you have programs whereby it's showing young people, this is how you start to get into it.
True.
Because we are in agreement that the experience is a necessary factor for you to be considered for certain positions in leadership.
Exactly.
So then maybe the internship, even at that level, then makes sense, no?
Well, internship and mentorship goes hand in hand. What we need in this space for the young people is to be in a place where they are able to demonstrate and to build their own capacity on leadership. If we leave the whole conversation, like now the aspect of civic rights and the youth rights, actually, many young people don't know what the youth rights are. And they end up with that kind of, minimal exposure. They are all left with only one segment, that when things don't go right, then I hit the street. We need to rethink about how to integrate, how to mentor, how to also give the apprenticeship in terms of exposure to the young people, because at the end of the day, that is what really the young people are lacking.
You see, another way of looking at it is in the country, we actually do have the Youth Parliament of Kenya, which is an independent institution run by the young people, which goes forward to talk about this experience that we have. But when you look at what Youth Parliament does, one asks the question, what do they do? Who do they represent? What policies do they have? Do they check the government? Do they check their peers who are in these government leadership positions? And an emphatic answer would be no. Perhaps is it about time that such bodies like Youth Parliament would work as a shadow cabinet, as a shadow government, so that even when we talk about the finance bill is being presented, this Youth Parliament would come with a counter proposal on how things would be done, and through that we see capacity being built moving forward. Perhaps these are things that we could push through policy to be changed in Parliament, so that then we have a stake and we have a voice to the government that is.
I agree with you entirely. I think we have discussed this here, and you have said that the problem is that the youth, especially we talked about the Youth Council earlier, has been absorbed in the already existing system and structure. So we need to be independent to the extent that we can actually provide oversight and actually provide solutions to whatever is problems already existing. So independent to the extent we don't receive orders from anybody in government to discuss whatever agenda that suits them.
Yes.
We need to be independent to the extent that we can actually counter a proposal that has been given by government or any state official, to that extent that we then have a better solution. We then say that this one is not done correctly, this one is done correctly. And that builds into the capacity, that builds into the experience, that helps us to be more exposed as we are speaking. So we need to look at the policies that are already existing. We need to align them to the independence part of it, the independence of the Youth Parliament, so that then we can have a shadow kind of cabinet and shadow parliament to oversight whatever is happening in government.
It's interesting that you say that, because I remember that some of the clubs that I was in high school and then getting into university, is that you did, and even at higher levels in the university program, is that you had a group where you were independent. You were independent, but you had what they called a chaperone.
Yes.
You had somebody who was higher up in experience, who guided you.
True.
Because it is not possible in life, in government, in politics, to operate independently, especially if you don't have the adequate experience in the life nitty-gritty of things. So we seem to be wanting to run away from what seems to be necessary when it comes to guidance and experience building. But are we saying that the need for that doesn't exist? Because I hear you saying, Wakili, that you need, let us be over here making our decisions, and when we're done, we give them to you, and then you see how you're going to fix them in. Can that really work? In today's current dispensation, can it work that you have a group of people over here, you remove yourself, you kind of, it's kind of like Lego, right? The piece that's supposed to stick here, it's empty, but we're going to go over here, build it, and then when we are done, we're going to think that automatically we're going to come back and it'll stick back into the rest of this machine that keeps moving. In the way I'm thinking about it, if the machine keeps moving and you come back with your piece, your hole is long gone.
Yeah, it is. I think is an issue of, as we started this conversation, is a legislative issue. I like the idea of youth parliament. It's a very solid idea. But now its independence is where the gap is. I think we need to have a semi-autonomous way of correlating with the government, because you cannot work outside. If you want to have impact or to have a say even in governance, also you have to have a way of connecting with government or with governance. So it's a question of these policies that are there. Are they able to integrate the subject of youth parliament also as a semi-autonomous organization in itself, that instead of people, the young people going to the street, they can say, look, we have our youth parliament, okay? And this youth parliament is a representation of the way we think. So can we petition our voice through this structure?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.